I gave the best advice of my life to a man whose name I never learned. That was 1987. November. The kind of cold that doesn't ask permission, it just walks through your coat and sits in your chest. I was 51 years old, standing on a bridge over the Allegheny River in Pittsburgh, not because I was thinking of jumping. I want to be clear about that. I was standing there because I didn't know where else to go. My wife of 24 years had died 11 weeks earlier. 11 weeks. I had counted every single day like a man counting the last of his money, hoping somehow the number would stop growing. There was a younger man leaning on the railing maybe 20 feet from me. Late 20s, I guessed. He had no hat. In that cold. His hands were red and he wasn't looking at the water, he was staring at it the way you stare at something when you're not really seeing it anymore. I didn't plan to speak to him. I don't know why I did. Here is what I can tell you before I go any further, and I am telling you this not because I am wise, but because I am 89 years old and wisdom and foolishness have had enough time to show me which one I actually chose. I spent 40 years telling people how to carry grief. Neighbors, friends, my own children after their mother died, strangers at church who somehow found their way to my kitchen table. I knew the words. I knew the exact shape of the thing. I could describe loss the way a surgeon describes a wound precisely, without flinching, with full knowledge of what needs to be done. And I never once did it myself. Not once in 38 years. That is what this story is about. Not the stranger on the bridge. Not what I told him that morning in November. It is about the man who said those words and then went home, closed the door, and slowly, quietly, disappeared inside himself while everyone around him thought he was fine. I looked fine for a very long time. Margaret died on a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because Tuesday was the day she always did the washing. And when I came home from the hospital that night after sitting with her for 6 hours while the machines went quiet one by one, I walked into the kitchen and there was a basket of her laundry sitting by the door. Clean. Folded. She had done it that morning before I drove her in for what we thought was a routine appointment. I stood there looking at that basket for a long time. I didn't touch it for 4 months. That should have told me something. A man who cannot move a basket of laundry is not a man who is coping. He is a man who has decided, without saying it out loud, that if nothing moves, if nothing changes, then maybe time will agree to stop. Maybe the world will have the decency to wait. The world did not wait. From the outside, I was doing everything correctly. I went back to work after 3 weeks. People said I was strong. I showed up to my son David's baseball games. I nodded when people spoke to me at church. I shook hands. I answered questions. How are you holding up, Gerald? Fine. Holding up fine. And I believed it, partly. I believed it the way you believe a story you've told so many times you've forgotten it isn't quite true. What was actually happening, what no one saw, was that I had stopped eating real meals. Not dramatically. I wasn't wasting away. I just stopped caring about food the way a man stops caring about something that used to matter because the person who made it matter is gone. Margaret had cooked every dinner of our marriage. 24 years of dinners. I didn't know how to want food without her across the table. I lost 19 pounds in 5 months. My doctor noticed. He asked if I was eating. I said yes. He wrote something in his file. I never found out what. At night I slept on my side of the bed. Only my side. For 3 years I slept on my side of the bed. The other half of the mattress still had the slight impression of where she used to lie, and I will not pretend I could not make myself move toward the center. It felt like a line I was not allowed to cross. Like crossing it would mean agreeing that she wasn't coming back. I knew she wasn't coming back. But grief doesn't care what you know. Grief only cares what you can bear to admit at 2 in the morning when the house is completely silent and the furnace clicks on, and for 1/2 second that I am not exaggerating, it sounds just enough like the sound of her slippers on the kitchen floor that your whole body goes still and you hold your breath and you wait. And then it clicks off. And the house is quiet again. And you lie there on your side of the bed. I did that for years. Not weeks. Years. And all along, all through those years, I was the man other people came to when they didn't know how to survive their own losses. I sat across from them. I held their hands. I said exactly the right things because I knew exactly the right things. I had read them, studied them, felt them somewhere deep enough to speak them with real authority. I just couldn't give them to myself. There is a particular kind of loneliness in that. In being the person who knows the medicine and refuses to take it. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels, and I know this now, at 89, with enough distance to finally look at it clearly, it feels like punishment. Like some part of you decided you don't deserve to heal. Like healing would be a betrayal of how much it hurt. Like if you stopped drowning, it means the water wasn't that deep. The water was deep. I just kept telling other people how to swim. The first time I understood something was wrong, truly wrong, not just grief wrong but something structural, something I had built deliberately inside myself, was in the spring of 1989. 18 months after Margaret died. My daughter Carol came to visit from Cincinnati. She was 26 then. She brought her boyfriend, a quiet man named Paul who shook hands too firmly and didn't know where to look in a room. They stayed for a weekend. Saturday morning Carol made breakfast: eggs, toast, coffee, and set the table the way her mother used to set it. Plates in the same position. Coffee cup on the right. A small glass of orange juice even though no one had asked for one. She didn't do it on purpose. I could see that. But I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and I could not go in. Carol looked up and saw my face, and her own face changed in a way I will carry with me to my grave. She was 26 years old and she was looking at her father the way you look at something fragile that you're afraid to touch. She said, "Dad, sit down. It's just breakfast. Just breakfast." I sat down. I ate. I said the eggs were good. Paul talked about his job. I nodded at the right moments. That night after they left, I sat in the kitchen alone for 2 hours without turning on the light. I didn't connect those two things, the dark kitchen, Carol's face, to anything that needed fixing. I filed them under grief. Grief was my explanation for everything. Grief was a room I had moved into and quietly decided was permanent. The second moment came 4 years later. 1993. I was 57. A man from my church, younger than me, maybe 44, lost his son. 19 years old. A car accident on a wet road in October. I went to see him 3 days after the funeral because that is what you do, and because by then people expected it of me. Gerald will know what to say. Gerald has been through it. I sat across from this man, his name was Roy, in his living room with the curtains half drawn and that particular stillness that fills a house after something catastrophic, the way silence has a different weight in those rooms, heavier, almost visible. Roy looked at me and said, "How did you do it, Gerald? How did you keep going after Margaret?" And I told him. I told him clearly, specifically, with the full force of everything I had learned and read and observed. I told him that grief is not a wall, it is a door, and the only way through it is to walk toward it rather than away. I told him you have to let yourself feel the specific things, not grief in general, which is too large to hold, but the small specific losses inside the big one. The sound of a voice. The habit of a presence. The way someone laughed at something no one else found funny. I told him you have to name those things out loud, to someone, because named things lose a fraction of their power over you each time. Roy wept. Openly, without embarrassment. I handed him a box of tissues and kept my own eyes dry. Driving home I felt something I can only describe as hollow. Not empty, hollow. Like a bell that has been rung so many times the sound has worn away and now it just moves air without making music. I was 57 years old and I had not once in 6 years named a single specific thing to another living person. Not the laundry basket. Not the sound of the furnace. Not my side of the bed. Not one word of it. To anyone. The third moment is the one that should have broken through. It was 1997. 10 years after Margaret. My son David, he was 34 then, living in Philadelphia, working too hard the way young men do when they're trying to prove something, called me on a Sunday evening. We talked for a while about ordinary things. His work. The weather. Whether I needed anything fixed around the house. Then he went quiet for a moment and said, "Dad, are you lonely?" Simple question. 4 words. I had my answer ready before he finished the sentence. The answer was already formed, already moving toward my mouth, smooth and practiced and completely false. "No," I said. "I keep busy." "You know me." He said, "Yeah. I know." The way he said "I know," not warm, not cold, just tired, that should have stopped me. That was a son who had been trying to reach his father for 10 years and had learned to stop expecting to arrive. I heard it. I filed it under grief. We said good night. I hung up the phone and sat in the same kitchen, in the same chair, in the same house where Margaret had folded that laundry basket on the last morning of her life, and I felt nothing unusual. That was the most frightening thing, not that it hurt. That it didn't. I had gotten so good at managing the distance between myself and my own life that it no longer required any effort. I had become very, very good at being alone. I just didn't call it that yet. The stranger on the bridge came back to me in 2001. Not the man himself. I never saw him again. What came back was the memory of what I had said to him, the exact words, and it came back at the worst possible moment, the way true things always do. Not when you are ready. Not when you have time to prepare. But when you are standing in a hospital corridor at 11 o'clock at night in paper slippers because they had taken your shoes, wearing a gown that ties in the back, and a nurse you have never met is looking at you with the specific careful expression that medical people use when they are about to say something that will change the shape of your life. I was 65. I had collapsed in my kitchen 3 days earlier. They found blockages. They found other things. They used words I had to ask them to repeat, not because I didn't hear them, but because hearing them once didn't seem like enough to make them real. David flew in from Philadelphia. Carol drove up from Cincinnati. They sat on either side of my hospital bed and tried to be brave in front of each other, and I could see exactly how much effort that was costing them both. On the third night David stayed late after Carol went back to the hotel. He sat in the chair beside the bed, and for a long time neither of us said anything. The room had that particular hospital quiet, not silence exactly, but a muffled version of the world, sounds coming from far away, the occasional soft announcement over the intercom, the squeak of shoes on linoleum somewhere down the hall. David was 38 years old. He looked like his mother around the eyes. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor and said, "Dad, I need to ask you something and I need you to actually answer me." I said, "All right." He didn't look up right away. He took a breath first. Then he said, "Have you been happy since Mom died? Any of it? Has any of it been good?" 14 years. He was asking me about 14 years. I opened my mouth to give him the answer I always gave. The answer about keeping busy. About the church, the neighbors, the grandchildren when they came to visit, the garden in the summer, the way I had built a life that looked from the outside like a life. And something stopped me. Not courage. I don't want to call it courage because that would make it sound like a choice I made deliberately, and it wasn't. It was more like exhaustion. Like a man who has been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and his arms simply quietly give out. I looked at my son. And I said, "No. Just that. No." The word sat in the room between us like something physical. David looked up at me then. His eyes were wet. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone finally confirms something you have known for years but were afraid to say first. He said, "I know, Dad. I've known for a long time, and this is the part I have thought about nearly every day for the last 24 years." He said something that knocked the air out of me completely. He said it quietly, without accusation, without anger. He said it the way you say something that costs you something to say. He said, "You taught Mr. Bellamy how to grieve when his wife died. You sat with Roy Hutchins for months after he lost his boy. You told me once I was maybe 16, you told me that the most dangerous thing a person can do with pain is treat it like a secret. You said secrets rot." He stopped. Then he said, "Dad, what did you do with yours?" I had no answer. For the first time in 65 years I had absolutely no answer. I lay in that hospital bed in my paper gown and I thought about a bridge in Pittsburgh in November of 1987. I thought about a young man with no hat and red hands staring at the water. I thought about what I had said to him, a complete stranger, with such clarity and such genuine conviction that he had eventually straightened up, turned around, and walked back toward the city without a word. I had told him, "You cannot carry grief alone and survive it. No man can. It was never designed to be carried alone." I had believed that completely. I had believed it for 65 years. And I had spent 14 of those years proving it wrong, on myself, quietly, in a house where the laundry basket stayed by the door for 4 months and no one knew, and I told myself that was strength. That was not strength. I knew, lying there, finally, what it was. There is a word I have stopped using. The word is coping. For 14 years I told myself and everyone who asked that I was coping. Coping with loss. Coping with grief. Coping with being alone. It is a word that sounds like progress. It sounds like movement, like a man walking forward through difficult terrain. But I have lived long enough now to know what coping actually is, at least the way I practiced it. Coping is standing still and calling it walking. Coping is building a very convincing performance of a life and then living inside the performance until you forget there was supposed to be something real underneath it. It is not surviving loss. It is postponing it. Filing it away in a drawer you never open, and then spending your energy making sure no one else opens it either, including yourself. What I should have called it, what I wish someone had handed me a word for in those first raw weeks after Margaret died, is this: managed disappearance. That is what I did. I didn't fall apart. Falling apart would have been honest, would have been visible, would have forced something to happen. Instead I managed my own disappearance so carefully, so professionally, that even the people who loved me most could only sense it without being able to name it. David sensed it for 14 years. He knew his father was gone somewhere and couldn't find the door to follow. That is what I took from my son. Not just years. 14 years of a father who was present in the room and absent in every way that actually matters. I cannot get those back. At 89, you understand very clearly which things cannot be gotten back. Here is what I know now that I wish I had known at 51, standing in that kitchen, looking at that basket of laundry. Grief is not the enemy. Grief is the proof. It is the exact measure of what something meant to you, and the only way to honor that measure is to let it be seen. Not performed. Not managed. Seen. By one person. You only need one. One person who sits across from you and does not flinch and does not try to fix it and does not hand you a word like coping and call it help. I had that person. I had David. I had Carol. I had neighbors and friends and a church full of people who would have sat with me without flinching. I chose a kitchen chair in the dark instead. And here is the question I want you to sit with, not answer immediately, just sit with it the way you sit with something that might be important. Who have you been performing for, not who have you been strong for? Strength is real, strength matters. But performing. Showing up with the right face, the right words, the right posture of a person who is handling things. Who have you been doing that for, and how long have you been doing it, and what is still sitting in a drawer somewhere that you have not allowed yourself to open? Because here is what I can tell you from 89 years of living, from 38 years of doing it wrong and 24 years of slowly, painfully doing it slightly less wrong, the drawer doesn't disappear. You think it does. You think if you leave it long enough it will somehow resolve itself, dissolve, become irrelevant with enough time and enough distance. It does not. It sits there with the same weight it had on the first day. The only thing that changes is you get better at not looking at it. You get so good at not looking that eventually you forget what you put in there. You just carry the weight without a name for it. An unnamed weight is the heaviest kind. I told a stranger that on a bridge in 1987. I told Roy Hutchins that in his living room in 1993. I told my own daughter that on the phone in 1995 when her first serious relationship ended and she called me crying at midnight. I never told myself. You may be reading this and thinking, but my situation is different. My loss is different. I am not like this man. I am not hiding, I am not disappearing, I am genuinely fine. I am handling it. I understand that thought completely. It is exactly what I thought for 14 years. And I am not saying you are wrong. I am saying that I was also not lying when I thought it. I genuinely believed I was fine. I had built the belief so carefully, furnished it so completely, that it felt indistinguishable from the truth. The difference, the only difference I have found, at 89, looking back with the particular clarity that comes when you have run out of reasons to protect yourself from honesty, the difference is this: fine people can name what they lost. Not in general. Not I lost my wife, or I lost my marriage, or I lost my health. Specifically. The Tuesday laundry. The sound of slippers on a kitchen floor. The way someone laughed. The particular quality of an ordinary evening that you didn't know was extraordinary until it was gone. Can you name yours? Not to me. To someone. One person. In a room. Out loud. If you can, if you have already done that, if there is someone in your life who knows the specific shape of what you carry, then you are doing something I failed to do for nearly 4 decades. If you cannot, if the specific things are still sitting in a drawer with no name on them, then I am asking you, as a man of 89 who has earned the right to ask this plainly, What are you waiting for? Not rhetorically. I mean it as a real question. What specific thing are you waiting for before you allow yourself to be known? Because I waited for a hospital bed. I waited for paper slippers and a gown that ties in the back and my son's wet eyes and a question I had no answer to. I waited until I was 65 years old and running out of time before I said a single true thing about what my life had actually felt like for 14 years. I got lucky. I had time left after that night. Not everyone does. You may have more time than I did. You probably do, but time has a way of feeling infinite right up until the moment it demonstrably isn't, and by then the drawer is very full and the people you needed to open it with may not be in the room anymore. David is 62 now. We have had 24 years of something real since that hospital night. Not perfect. Not without the shadow of what came before. But real. Present. His eyes don't go tired the way they used to when I said I keep busy, you know me. 24 years of that is not nothing. It is also not what we could have had. That is the part I live with. I still think about that man on the bridge sometimes. He would be in his 60s now, if life was kind to him. Maybe he has children. Maybe he has sat across from someone he loves in a difficult moment and said something true and useful. Maybe something I said on that cold November morning in 1987 became a thread in the fabric of how he lived, and through him, in people I will never meet, in rooms I will never see. I hope so. I genuinely hope so. But I have stopped telling myself that story as though it redeems the other one. The story of the man who gave away the medicine and refused it himself. Those two things exist together, and I have learned, finally, at 89, to let them exist together without trying to make one cancel out the other. I was capable of real wisdom. I was also capable of profound and sustained dishonesty with myself. Both are true. Both were always true. The basket of laundry sat by the door for 4 months. I can still see it exactly. The particular blue of the plastic. The way her blouse was folded on top. She always folded her blouses with the sleeves crossed in front, like arms. I stood in that doorway on the night she died, and I looked at it, and something in me made a decision I didn't fully understand until a hospital room 14 years later. The decision was, if I don't move it, I don't have to admit what it means that she isn't here to move it herself. That was the beginning of everything. One basket. One decision to leave something exactly where it was. 14 years. I am 89 years old. I have buried a wife, outlived 2 friends, watched my children grow into people Margaret would have loved completely. I have sat on the side of enough loss to know its full geography, every slope, every false plateau, every place where the ground looks solid and isn't. And the only thing I know with absolute certainty, the only thing I would cross a room to tell you, the only thing worth saying after 89 years of living and 38 years of getting this particular thing wrong is this: you cannot give someone directions to a place you have never been willing to go yourself. I knew the way. I just never walked it. Don't wait for the paper slippers.